What must your mother think of you?
Oh, she doesn't think much about anything anymore.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did she pass?
No, not exactly.
Alright, I did one parent, now it's time for the other. Equality! Hi, I'm Kitty Monk, and I'm here to talk to you about Bojack Horseman, or more specifically, Honey Sugarman, Beatrice's mother and Bojack's grandmama. Like I said with Joseph, it took me a while to get to these two, mostly because I started off writing one big video, but it just felt like way too much material, so I figured 2 videos were better than one. Like with beavers. 2 beavers are better than one. They're twice the fun. Another reason is, when it comes to Bojack, like a big problem and the reason why I rarely discuss it is, I feel like everything you could say about the Horseman family has already been said. Beatrice has a super sad backstory, but it makes for good writing, and it makes a good point that it's okay to sympathize with your abusive parents, or heck, in a way, even relate if that helps you become a better person, so long as you don't excuse or condone their actions. Or Butterscotch could have gotten more focus, even if, as many of you have argued, perhaps that's part of the point. But then I started writing and I realized something. No, this might seem a little teeny tiny bit controversial, but I'm just gonna put it out there. While I do think Honey is a victim, and I'm trying very hard not to come off as condescending or anything, since I read comments and that's not the point, I try to explain my side. That way, even if you disagree with me, you can still see where I'm coming from at least. I feel that kinda like with Sarah Lynn, people sort of overlook some of her faults, especially as a mother. I'm sorry. So let's discuss. Now, I guess so I can help avoid those comments, let me make it very clear. While I do think Honey had flaws as a mother, outside of the trauma caused by her grieving, it doesn't make what happens to her any less worse. And honestly, she doesn't deserve to become what she did. Nobody deserves to be a shell like that, like a living death. But I think people forget in a way that sometimes victims can still make mistakes or stuff like that, and it's not victim blaming to point it out. I mean, that's a big part of Bojack's character. He's a victim of stuff, like a victim of an abusive childhood, but that doesn't absolve him of, say, acting like a cool uncle to Penny and then trying to sleep with her, or wanting to be on good terms with Hollyhock, while also sleeping with who he presumes to be her mother right in front of her when she still thinks he's her biological father, because he should know better. And I think that describes Honey pretty well. She's a victim of the time she lived in, and she's a victim of her husband, but she still made many mistakes as a mother that people tend to overlook. Like I said with Joseph, a big theme with Beatrice's family is that they're products of their time, and Honey is no exception. The flashbacks took place in the 1940s, the 50s, and the 60s, and during that time, women had a lot of unfair views forced upon them. For example, they weren't meant to be anything beyond housewives and mothers, which describes Honey to a T. And then there were the appearance standards. Part of that view was that you had to be pretty, well, more than pretty, and that included being as skinny as a rail, which I guess in a way was true for everybody, but especially if you were a woman, since it's the only possible way you'll ever bag a man. And I'd argue that it's even worse with the Sugarman family, both because the rich tend to be a lot more stuck in the past than us peasants, and because outside of Cracker Jack, they weren't forced to contribute anything like the rest of the country was during the 1940s. After all, there was that little tiny bout of feminism because of the war effort. Since almost all men were deployed, women had to take over and, oh my goodness, get jobs outside of the house. Sorry, getting off track. As an adult, Beatrice has body image issues, always taking diet pills, which she calls her pretty pills.
Again, Miss Sugarman, please.
Polly, be a darling and fetch me a pretty pill and a glass of water, won't you?
Yes, Señorita Sugarman.
And nearly killing Hollyhock by trying to do the same to her, aka drugging her with amphetamines.
Chub be gone.
Takes the pounds right off.
This whole time.
Just until she learned to take it herself.
As a child, she was considered overweight, which she obviously wasn't, but people and Clemelia Bloodsworth are jerks. And while her father played a big part effort in encouraging that mindset, like telling her that the only good part about getting sick is that she gets to lose weight, her mother was no help and, in a way, actually kind of enabled it. For example, at the start of the old Sugarman house, we see Honey prepare this really big breakfast of pancakes, and they look super delicious. And Beatrice is around to help her. But they're not pancakes for the whole family to enjoy. They're for her father.
All right, Beatrice, you got a good whiff. Now step away from your father's breakfast before he catches you a sniffing and gives you a spanking.
Yes, Mother.
Later, Joseph gives one of Cracker Jack's friends some money to go buy ice cream, what with it being summer and all. And when Beatrice says she wants to try some too, her mother tells her no. But not because, argument's sake, they're still eating breakfast and she can't have everything she wants. Rather, it's because she's a girl.
You know iced cream is for boys. You can sprinkle some sugar on a lemon. That's a good healthy girl snack.
Oh, all right.
And there's also this clip of them leaving the summer home, which admittedly makes me laugh every single time.
Oh, darling, don't lift that. You'll rupture your uterus.
You know, I'm surprised mine hasn't ruptured already, what with all of the heavy lifting I do with my suitcases. Ugh, I hate overhead compartments. True, Joseph does run a company whose primary export is sugar and sugar accessories, and hey, it's good he's teaching his child to avoid sweets as much as possible because sugar isn't healthy, but he and Honey are only doing it because Beatrice is a woman. And God forbid this child gain 10 pounds by eating one ice pop. It's super unfair, and all it did was give this child a complex, or some kind of disordered eating, because all she did was internalize those comments. You know, in a way, comments are kind of like credit card debt. They start off small and get bigger over time. Some people have told me that Beatrice probably had ice cream outside of this. And yeah, she does have one ice cream later on, but only 2 licks, and it's an ice pop, not like soft serve like Bojack was trying to tell her. But I'd argue that her father's beliefs, the trauma from that one night, and her body image issues made her permanently stay away from the stuff. Especially this comment she made during thoughts and prayers when she's in her senile state, and Bojack makes a reference to him eating ice cream.
30 seconds after that picture was taken, you were yelling at me for getting ice cream on my shorts.
No ice cream for me, Henrietta. I'm watching my figure.
Yeah, you want to look pretty for when death comes to visit.
Which is super tragic when you remember she was on her own for 4 years at Barnard, which is in New York City, which in many ways is kind of like the freedom capital of the world. Or at least to me. And there was probably ice cream somewhere.
Think of all the free ice cream you could serve to other people.
But Beatrice could never fully overcome her own personal demons. And when she had that one taste of freedom, she never took the opportunity. And true, most of what people are saying to her is treated as jokes, but this is Bojack Horseman. Honey lived with her husband, Joseph, and her children, Cracker Jack and Beatrice. One summer, the family gathered at the Sugarman summer home, not knowing it's the last time they'll all be together. One last time. In order to take a family picture before Cracker Jack goes off to war. And something I need to make clear is Cracker Jack wasn't forced to go to war like most men his age. As the heir to a rich company, he was likely exempt from the draft. And said company ran on sugar, something that was being rationed, as Honey pointed out, so I could totally see him helping his father with the war effort that way. But he got taken in by the World War II propaganda, thinking that as a soldier, he would get to travel and drink beer after killing Nazis, and feast on all the angels he could eat.
And then after a long day of killing Nazis, we'll sit in a beer garden and enjoy a pint.
And his innocence would cost him dearly. Cracker Jack and Honey were quite close, perhaps closer than Honey and her own daughter, and one of their favorite things to do together was play the piano. Before the family picture, Honey and Cracker Jack played one of their favorite songs, I Will Always Think of You, which while it does count as foreshadowing, I've always wondered about the significance in universe. I'm guessing it was a popular song back then, I'd imagine, like a song about the war, or kinda like I'm Always Chasing Rainbows, one of those songs that starts off as related to the war or something like that, and then becomes mainstream and basically loses its original meaning.
How did such a sweet face end up with such a smart mouth?
I don't know, but I've got half a mind trying to kiss you with that smart mouth.
Well, that half you can keep.
Move on to the cute part.
Say, if it isn't my old baby blanket, Blinky.
I thought you could take it with you.
Mama, I don't need no Blinky Blanky to fight in any Nazis.
Wait, people name blankets? I'm sorry, I had no clue. I mean, I named all 20 of my stuffed animals, and I still sleep with a stuffed animal every night. And I have my own baby blanket I save, but I never named it. It was just called my baby blanket.
Me?
That's right. I'll fight better if I know Blinky's safe with you. Mwah.
Aww. Now, while this video is about Honey, in some way it is also about Crackerjack, because Crackerjack turned her into the woman she eventually became. And something I do appreciate is how Crackerjack was as a brother. Because of the standards of his time, due to having a wiener and also being a horse and all, probably a big one at that, Crackerjack was favored by his parents, like we saw here. I wouldn't be surprised if he was the favorite, or he got more attention than Beatrice. Yet despite this, he doesn't treat his little sister any differently, or make any kind of demeaning remarks or jokes like his parents do. Like, Beatrice constantly remembered him as this great guy. Heck, it's even implied she named Bojack after him.
Crackerjack?
That's what it says on my underpants.
The uncle I never met and yet could never live up to.
Even if I like to think Bojack is a made-up name like Renesmee to honor all of the guys in her life, like B for Butterscotch, Bo rhymes with Joe for Joseph, and Jack for Crackerjack. Regardless, in a way, this makes the scene kind of sad. He was just a kid way in over his head. The summer ended and the Sugarmans went back home, but come winter, they learned that Crackerjack had been shot in the head and killed. Meaning, for all of his talks about being a hero, he barely survived a year. Like, he didn't even make it to a year, I don't think.
She's dead?
He's gone, honey. Even Blinky couldn't have stopped that Nazi's bullet.
Oh, Joseph, I failed him.
Originally, I was gonna say that Crackerjack died early on, and that made things worse. But when I was writing this video, I went to the Bojack Horseman wiki to see if there was perhaps anything I might have missed. And wouldn't you know it, Crackerjack actually died in December of 1944. Like half a year before the war ended, and that's even more tragic. It's like if he just held off enlisting or he joined a couple of months later, he likely would have survived. Sorry, whenever I read war stories or stuff like that, for me, hindsight is always 20/20. Like, for all they knew, the war was gonna go on for years and years, but we know, because we're in the future, no, maybe only a couple of months at most. Especially when I was reading the book Night, because I had to read that book a couple of times for school, and Ellie was in the infirmary, but he snuck out to go save his father because his father was being sent on a death march. But as he later learned, if he stayed in the infirmary, he would have been freed 2 days later. It's just weird to think, what if, you know? Now, according to The View from halfway down, he never killed 50 men. What's worse is, he didn't really accomplish anything as a soldier. He didn't free anybody from the camps, which, considering when he enlisted, is unfortunately too realistic. And his only real kills, or confirmed kills at least, were friendly fires.
Charity work and killing Nazis.
I actually never killed a Nazi. All my kills were friendly fire. I also never liberated any camps. I'm honestly not sure what I did.
But I have my doubts. Considering how that episode is just Bojack's mind trying to come to terms with dying, we don't fully know, probably because the army or Bojack himself probably didn't fully know. I do think that realistically, he probably didn't do anything major, kind of like most soldiers, but I could also see Bojack looking up his uncle's record after his mother spends her whole childhood comparing the pair, or Bojack sarcastically thinking, why was I compared to a hero who probably died before he could do anything heroic?
He's not a hero!
Yeah, okay, yeah, my thoughts exactly.
Thank you. He imagines stuff so much it feels like a memory, a beat with no melody. And before we move on, sorry, I have one more tangent. So like I said with Joseph, Crackerjack was based on Joseph Kennedy Jr., one of JFK's brothers who joined the army during World War II. The reason he was allowed to join, despite the family he came from, was because his father never thought he would see actual combat. due to being a Kennedy and all, which I could totally see Joseph Sugarman thinking the same thing. Like, oh, he's not gonna do anything, they're gonna keep him far from the actual front lines. They're just gonna show him, look boys, you could join the army like Rich Boy, Crackerjack, Sugarman. Joseph Jr. was an airline pilot, unlike Crackerjack, and he died in the summer of 1944, which is likely why we got the whole, summer home thing, and unfortunately, because of how he died, they were never able to recover his body. Now, when Bojack is watching TV on his phone, we see a flashback of the Sugarman family in the aftermath of Crackerjack's death, driving all the way to the summer home to find Blinky. You know, the blanket he gave to his sister?
Here it is, Mother. I put it in the closet for safekeeping.
I never should have let him go.
Honey, no. If anyone's to blame, it's the Jews for peeving off Hitler.
Which makes me wonder if more tragically, kinda like Joseph Jr., they couldn't find his body for whatever reason, or if he came back to his family in pieces, like it was hard to identify him. And one of the reasons Honey forced the family to find Blinky wasn't just because her son died and she wanted every reminder of him she could, but because that was all she had left of him, and if that's true, that's freaking sad. But this is where the darkness begins. Life went on for the Sugarman family, just with the shadow of Crackerjack constantly lurking behind them, which made things worse for everybody. And once again, let's factor in the standards of the time. In the 1940s, and unfortunately until recently, psychiatry and therapy were considered practically witchcraft, which meant that Honey wasn't allowed to openly express her grief over her son dying and had to bottle it up. And as a man of his standards, Joseph wasn't allowed to console her, or try to. And you kinda see the cracks with Beatrice with a parental reversal like we see later on in the episode. She probably doesn't understand the full weight of what's happening, and all she's doing is trying to console her mother by playing the piano like Crackerjack used to, not realizing that's just making her mother sadder because it's reminding her that her son's dead and they can no longer play the piano together. And not wanting to deal with women, Joseph just up and left them to go to work, which made things worse.
As a modern American man, I am woefully unprepared to manage a woman's emotions. I was never taught, and I will not learn. Take care, you two.
Parentification. Then 1945 happened and the war was over. People celebrated, and that included Beatrice and Honey. Only Joseph was nowhere to be found.
Yes! Let's paint the town scarlet, crimson, and ruby. Why, I've got half a mind to paint things redder than the banks of Normandy. Ha ha! What? Too soon?
The pair went into town to celebrate, and because of everything that was going on, Honey allowed Beatrice anything she wanted, even ice cream.
Mother, can I get a Freezy Pop?
Sure, darling. You can have whatever you want.
Attention, everyone!
Which I think going into town was the right choice, kind of in theory. They say that with grief, the best thing you can do is get out of the household. Isolation just fuels your depression, as all you do is ruminate on the memories. But then Honey saw something. Piano, like the one she and Crackerjack used to play. And she started to reflect on the past and what she had lost, and everybody else noticed. Which, considering the scene with Eddie in the future, it gives me questions as to how this was all happening in the past. Was she singing with somebody there? Like, were they playing the song as a tribute to the fallen soldiers? Was she singing by herself, like with no music, which is kind of hauntingly beautiful, which I find the latter more likely considering how Beatrice was reacting, and it seems so spooky. Still, things got worse as the memory of Crackerjack basically gave Honey a panic attack and made her unleash her bottled up emotions. Soon after, Honey spotted one of Crackerjack's war buddies, Sally, who, much to her sadness, had nothing to report about her son's death, and perhaps feeling neglected by her husband, she tried to kiss Sal, a younger, prettier face with a better connection to Crackerjack, which put him in a bad position too.
Please!
Mother?
Why did everybody stop, huh? What's the gag? I want to dance. I want to fly!
Whoa, is it bad I've experienced this a couple of times? Not like that, but okay, you know what? Next scene. The bartender tried to get her to go home, but she was too drunk to drive. And likely because of Harper's Landing being a small town, they couldn't get a cab to drive them home. And, you know, they probably couldn't find anybody willing to do it. I'm not trying to be sarcastic, because if you think like I'm trying to be like, oh, they could have asked Sal. Well, Sal's not gonna be willing to do that after what she did, unfortunately.
Say, I got a swell idea. Why don't you drive?
But I don't know how.
Why, it's only as easy as finding a hobo and a barrel of beans. It'll be grand. Everything will be just grand.
Instead, Beatrice had to drive, and while this is already incredibly iffy because she was 7 years old, Honey caused her daughter to crash the car by forcing her to speed up.
Faster! I want to feel alive again! I'd do anything to feel alive.
Now, I have to analyze this scene. When I see people discuss it, they wonder if perhaps Honey was trying to live her life to the fullest in spite of what happened, or if she was trying to see Crackerjack again, even if it meant taking her youngest child with her. Since I like to take a middle ground approach, I tell myself it was a mix of both. She was already having this manic type episode. I just feel like she didn't care anymore, and if she got to see Crackerjack again, well, that's a bonus. But sadly, she was alive. Wait, Kitty, what do you mean by sadly? I don't know, I was trying to be dramatic. Did it work? No, it didn't. Of course, she and Beatrice had to go home, looking like they did. And Joseph, well, I already explained my feelings towards him in his video. As in, he's kinda got a point when he says this.
And that's before even mentioning poor Beatrice. You aiming to get her killed as well? She's all we got.
But he doesn't have clean hands either, because either he should have been around to watch Honey and Beatrice, or tried to find them a friend or something like that. Still, Honey didn't know what to do and was left at a loss for words.
Just can't anymore. I can't stop thinking about him. I can't be with people, and I can't be alone. I don't know how to be better, Joseph. Please fix me.
What did Joseph do for her? Well, you remember how Honey said she had half a mind? Half a mind to do this and that and Sam and Cat? Well, good thing they had science back then. Lobotomies!
What's broken in the heart can never be repaired, but the brain, well, we have all sorts of science for the brain. She's a brand new woman now.
Which entailed basically hacking away at Honey's brain and severing some of the connections. And as you can expect, you became more manageable because you basically became a walking, talking vegetable, albeit in the worst way, if you actually survived the procedure. You remember how Honey used to be good at playing the piano? Well, now the best she could do was hit one key.
Oh, hello.
It's Beatrice.
Yes, that's right. What a pretty girl.
Damn. And going back to historical references, Honey is based on Rosemary Kennedy, JFK's sister. Rosemary Kennedy was dealt a bad hand at life. For example, at birth, she was deprived of oxygen because they had to wait for a doctor to arrive, because she and all her siblings were home births. So the nurses told her mother to keep her legs closed. Or when her and her sisters were presented to Queen Elizabeth's parents, she tripped and almost fell, even if she practiced the curtsy all she could. Heck, back then she was labeled a word you use for fire safety, even if at worst she just had an intellectual disability. And even that historians question. Even the doctor who lobotomized her questioned it, and said she was probably just depressed. Heck, they were so afraid of her embarrassing the family that when she had an interview with the Boston Globe, her father wrote out what to say. I have always had serious taste and understand life is not given us just for enjoyment. For some past, I have been studying the well-known psychological method of Dr. Maria Montessori, and I got my degree in teaching last year, even if apparently none of that was true. However, when she was in her early 20s, she basically acted like a wild teenager would. So as to avoid embarrassing her family, her father arranged for her to be lobotomized without telling her mother or other siblings. And if you want to know what it was like for Honey, like getting lobotomized? Well, here's a direct quote from the doctor who performed Rosemary's operation. After Rosemary was mildly sedated, we went through the top of her head. I think she was awake. She had a mild tranquilizer. I made a surgical incision in the brain through the skull. It was near the front. It was on both sides. We just made a small incision, no more than an inch. The instrument Dr. Watts used looked like a butter knife. He swung it up and down to cut brain tissue. We put an instrument inside. As Dr. Watts cut, Dr. Freeman asked Rosemary, for example, to recite the Lord's Prayer, or sing God Bless America, or count backwards. We tried to estimate thus how far further to cut, and based on how Rosemary responded. When she became incoherent, they ceased cutting. When Rosemary woke up, she was never the same. She had the mental faculties of a 2-year-old. Even later in life, with therapy, she couldn't speak coherently, she walked with a limp, and one of her arms was paralyzed. She was hidden from the rest of her family until her father's death, and she was a family secret for a very long time. Sorry if I'm getting off track, but this will all make sense later. And I think it's ironic. Joseph didn't want to deal with his family, and he wanted nothing but short-term solutions, because he doesn't want to deal with it, that he essentially made his wife a lifetime problem. And whenever she was out in public, as we do see her at Beatrice's debutante ball later on, he basically had to treat her like a doll. He was worried about what people were gonna say about his wife. What were they gonna say about him? And he told Beatrice that she was this way because she loved somebody too much, and she made Beatrice swear a promise.
Beatrice? Promise me you'll never love anyone as much as I loved Crackerjack.
I promise. I won't.
Okay, I'll die on this hill, but I don't think Beatrice followed through. I know people say, oh, she totally did. That's why she didn't love Bojack. Shut up, Catherine, and your stupid theories. But a big point about Beatrice's story is that she resented Bojack for her own poor choices, like marrying a man she barely knew who couldn't afford a nanny or a maid, one who was jealous she grew up with luxury and he grew up working class.
You better be worth all this.
Or that she couldn't marry Corbin Creamerman and idolize the vision of him, not unlike Bojack did with Charlotte.
It occurs to me that perhaps you and I aren't so—
Oh, dear!
Where, if we're actually being realistic, I like to think Beatrice would have been bored silly by Corbin, and still been under her father's rule on top of that, along with Corbin's father, and she would have given Bojack to a servant to raise. But, on the bright side, she would have been well taken care of. As for Honey, well, I think it's a red herring. Bojack Horseman is big on deconstructing tropes, and a big trope is called Freudian excuses, where a character has a sympathetic backstory and that redeems them to the audience.
How did I not see it? All this time I thought you were a terrible parent. And you were. But I blew it even worse.
Normally, with Freudian excuses, it's one thing that made them the way they are. Like Nebula is a cyborg because whenever she battled Gamora and lost, Thanos took a body part and replaced it with a machine. With Beatrice, it seems to be that she promised her mother she would never love anyone. But she was a child. Did she really understand what her mother meant? Not that it obviously wouldn't scar her for life, but I don't think she knew what she was agreeing to. And also scar as in like lobotomy. Pun not intended. Besides, she did initially love Bojack. After he was born, she was super loving to him. It wasn't until reality set in that she realized her mistakes and how she couldn't take it back or do it all over. I think a point they made was that with most backstories in real life, it's not one thing that turns you into who you are as a grown-up. Most of the time. It's complicated experiences that string you together to make you who you are. Like Beatrice never developed eating problems because her mother made one comment at breakfast. It was everybody around her, her father, her mother, the bullies at school, reinforcing to her that she didn't fit a narrow definition of beauty.
Even your lungs expostulate as they struggle to expel your ample corpulence.
She's saying your lungs think you're fat too.
Father says I'm just growing.
But what happened to Honey afterwards? Well, sadly, this was probably the last conversation Beatrice had with her mother, as she never speaks afterwards. And it's not like Henrietta where Beatrice knows what happened, but she wants to block out that memory. Joseph just forced the pair to resume life as usual, as that was the whole point of the operation. And that meant Honey could go back to being a mother. But she wasn't up there anymore. She was basically a living death, so she couldn't tell if Beatrice had scarlet fever or what was happening because she was no longer cognitive enough to watch her. However, her story and her constant presence left a permanent mark on Beatrice, again kinda like a lobotomy scar, and caused her to repress all of her emotions and strife, because if she slipped up, there was no telling if her father would lobotomize her as well.
Come on now, be strong. You can't let your womanly emotions consume you. You don't want to end up like your mother now, do you?
Still, a life as a lobotomy victim is not one you want to live. I hope Joseph fought to at least get her real help, like a nurse to watch her, as after all, unlike Joseph Kennedy, he was fine parading her at public places. Or was it something like outside of parties or public appearances, she was just kept in a room all day with a nurse? I mean, behind closed doors, we never see Beatrice with her mother, and she's never mentioned. It makes me wonder about stuff like her eating or going to the bathroom, because a lot of lobotomy victims actually became incontinent. So yeah, I could totally see her having a nurse, as Joseph wouldn't want to be embarrassed. But one final question, and I'll stop my ramblings. What did Bojack know about Honey? True, Beatrice said,
"You don't know how lucky you are to have me. I hope you die before I do, so you never have to know what it's like to lose a mother."
Well, as long as one of us dies, that's good enough for me.
but Bojack never references his grandmother, and I doubt Beatrice would want Bojack to know about that either. Well, as a kid, he did know of his grandfather, even if none of his comments imply what kind of a relationship they had, and simply lets us viewers speculate. I wonder if Honey was still alive when he was a child, because she probably had to be, right? Or if he was too young to know what she was doing or what happened to her and just assumed she was always quiet. Either way, it's sad. And if you're like Honey and have prolonged grief disorder, please get help. Please, your loved ones would want you to be happy and live life. It's not unfair for you. Enjoy your lemons and live life. When life gives you lemons, you put a little sugar on it because that's a really good healthy girl snack. Anyhow, bye!
Okay, enough me being a great mom. I'm gonna go hide your father's heart medication. Enjoy your dumb little TV show.